brief poem. I'm not reading the whole poem, but then some parts of the poem. I will start with that. So she says in an introduction, I don't know politics, but I know the names of those in power and can repeat them like days of week or names of months, beginning with Nehru. I am Indian, very brown, born in Malabar. I speak three languages, write in two, dream in one. So one clear aspect is that she is a bilingual writer. She knew three languages. She knew Malayalam, she knew English, and then she also knew Hindi because for a very long time she stayed in uh, Bombay also. And then she continues, it voices my joys, my longings, my hopes, and it is useful to me as cawing is to crows or roaring is to the lions. It is human speech, the speech of the mind that is here and not there, a mind that sees and hears and is aware. Dress is saris, be girl, a wife, they said, be embroiderer, be cook, be quarreler with servants, fit in, oh belong, cried the categorizers. Don't sit on walls or peep in through our lace-draped windows. Be Army, be Kamla, or better still, be Madhavi. That is a name that she wrote in, under which she wrote in Malayalam. It is time to choose a name, a role. Don't play pretending games. Don't play a schizophrenia or be a nympho. Don't cry embarrassingly loud when jilted in love. So this poem and introduction is actually not really an introduction to the self of the poet, but it actually complicates the very idea of the identity of the poet. She doesn't give one answer to the question who she is, but then there is a multiple kind of an array of identities that she is presenting in terms of her own self-identity. So she doesn't identify with one language, she doesn't identify with one geographical location, she doesn't identify with one socially assigned role, that of wife or mother or now in one way all of these sort of come together and fuses into one person, but then there is also at the same time there is a hesitance on her part to identify with any one of these. I want to talk a little bit about the biographical details of Kamala Das. We are more familiar with the name Madhavikutty in Kerala, so naturally that is a name that would come. But she was born in Kerala in 1934 to a very famous Malayali poet. Her mother was Nalapata Balamani Amma, and her father was also somebody who was an editor of a magazine. Her uncle was another very renowned poet in Kerala, Nalapata Narayana Menon. So she already had that background which would later assist her to become a writer. And she was born Nalapata Kamala. And the first book that she publishes in the 1950s, early 1950s, I think its name was Matilukal or Walls, carried the name Nalapata Kamala. Now, she was married off at a very early age, at 15, to somebody who was called Madhava Das, and then she was taken to Bombay after marriage. And then after reaching Bombay, she started writing poems, but then she started under the name Kamala Das. Simultaneously, she started writing in Malayalam. As I said, it was mainly prose works that she produced in Malayalam. But then she chose a pseudonym or a pen name that had nothing to do with her given name or official name, which was Madhavikutty. And she also became a very controversial figure in Kerala, especially after the publication of her autobiography Ende Katha, which is later translated into English as My Story. I don't know if it has been translated to Hindi also. I don't know which of her works have been translated into Hindi. So that is. So it was published in 1973 and then later was translated into English as My Story. Now, My Story suddenly became a huge controversy in Kerala because it had, it was very open, it was very scathing kind of criticism of the patriarchal society. But then one reason why it became controversial was also was because later, at a later point, she said that much of what she wrote in Ende Katha was fictional, that it had nothing to do with a documentary, or it was not, anyway, we have this understanding that autobiographies are verifiable, right? I mean, it is something that relates to what we call reality. It has to be truthful. But then she later pronounced that much of it was actually fictional. Um, there is one incident that she talks of in the autobiography, which is uh, her honeymoon period with her husband, where she actually describes the sexual intercourse that she had as rape. So this is the way in which she kind of characterized the. But at the same time, in many other writings, she also actually um, 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 showcased a profound kind of love for her husband also. So there were so many contradictions or so many kind of incongruities that was part of her writing. Now, um, I just wanted to quote one part of that autobiography for you, so that you also get a sense of how she writes. This is later, her own comment on the autobiography. She says, "Some people told me that writing an autobiography like this, with absolute honesty, keeping nothing to oneself, is like doing a striptease." So, um, writing an autobiography is almost like doing a striptease. True, maybe. I will firstly strip myself of clothes and ornaments. Then I intend to peel off the light brown skin and shatter my bonds. At last, I hope you will be able to see my homeless, orphan, intensely beautiful soul deep within the bone, deep down under, beneath even the marrow, in a fourth dimension. So, this is how she used to write. Um, So what we actually see in Madhavikutti or Kamala Das is precisely this kind of this play around this very categorical distinction that probably is something that comes out of patriarchal society between fiction and reality. And she never kind of ascribes to this strong division between fiction and reality. And that is also one reason why actually started with her biographical details. Now she comes back to Kerala after some time, and this woman who is born as Nalapata Kamala, who publishes his first novel, first story under the name Nalapata Kamala, who then goes on to publish her poems under the name Kamala Das, and then in Malayalam short stories and novels under the name Madhavikutty, comes back, and then at the age of 60s, early 60s, she decides to convert to Islam. And then she changes her name again, and which is now Kamala Suraya, and that is with the name she died in the I think in 1999. So she then becomes Kamala Suraya. And even when she is writing under the name Kamala Suraya, interestingly you see that she is writing poems, but in which the figure of Krishna becomes very central as this absent, desirable lover that she has been yearning for all through her writing, including my story, autobiography, which again created another controversy in Kerala public sphere because she has now converted, but then she is again writing, continue to write about Krishna, Lord Krishna, as an ideal lover. So you then can imagine, like, she has to face problems with traditional Hindu society, but then at the same time she has to face huge criticisms from a very traditional Muslim society as well. Now she doesn't place neatly in any of these camps, and she again continues to say that I am neither. I mean, I'm not really somebody who you can place in one of these positions. And it is in 2009 that she died. But then one more thing about her autobiographical detail is she writes another novel which is based on again a retrospective recollecting of a childhood, the time she spent with her grandmother in Malabar, where you actually find a small girl whose name is Ami. So she doesn't stick to one name, and probably if she had continued to live for some time, I suppose she would have changed her name again. Yeah. So you actually see a very problematic relationship that a woman writer, has with uh, her own identity. Now, so there are multiple ways in which her identity as a woman writer, as a woman in patriarchal society, become very problematic. As a bilingual writer, as as a woman who actually had to kind of deal with multiple languages in her life, uh, as a woman who had actually had to occupy multiple positions, domestic or official for that matter, in her life, and somebody who actually also tried with multiple, religious and kind of communitarian positions. Now, I will just refer to one or two short fiction that she wrote, which is again translated into English. Um, so, one of the ways generally that we read Kamala Das is again as a woman who is revolting against patriarchal society, the injunctions of patriarchal society that is against women. Now, a couple of stories that she wrote were in the context of the, you know, things like prostitution or um, deviant forms of sexuality that were not allowed in patriarchal society, etc. But what is also interesting is, like, in one story you have this is in Malayalam, it is called Rukmini Pavakutti, which is translated into English with the name a doll for a child prostitute. The story is about a child prostitute under the name Rukmini who is being sold to a brothel after she's raped by her own foster father. So her mother goes and sells her to the brothel, to the main prostitute of the brothel, saying that I won't be able to take care of her because there are these dangers. Her own father, her own foster father, has become a threat to her own life. And Rukmini joins this brothel at a very young age. She's still a child, and she develops a certain camaraderie between other prostitutes in the brothel. And the story is basically the depiction of this very squalid and very violent kind of place, which is the brothel, where people of different kinds, bureaucrats, government officials, people from different walks of life visit and have sex with all these prostitutes, including these minor children. Now, what is really interesting about this, the very story sort of starts with this description that a dialogue that the main prostitute says, who is called I in the story, who says that, okay, this is the very familiar story. When the mother is not at home, the foster father rapes the child, and then she laughs. So the point that I'm trying to make is that what is referred to here is a very violent kind of incident. But at the same time, the presentation, because you have the context of a brothel, the presentation is something that is very, very counterintuitive. Now, usually we will assume that, okay, from the feminist standpoint, you will immediately uh, you will be enraged by this fact, right? This minor child is raped by her own foster father, but you don't see that kind of a rage in that novel. And after that, there are so many incidents. One of the other prostitutes named Sita, actually, she's again very young and almost similar in age to Rukmini, who dies when giving birth to a child because she is like, because the child is illegitimate and she's very young and minor. So, but then that is also described and let go. I mean, you don't really see that feminist rage or revolt that we usually expect from a feminist writer. And Madhavi Gudi had a very complex relationship with feminism as well. She has multiple times she has said that I'm not a feminist, but I'm an ordinary woman. I am. Now, but at the same time, there is something in Madhavi Gudi which really shakes the foundations of patriarchal society. So how do we really understand this? I mean, there is something presented which is very violent, but at the same time, the violence is somehow hidden behind. And we also have to remember that the main protagonist of the story is Rukmini, who is a child, and a child who is not even at a stage where she can understand what sexual violence is. I'll take just 2-3 minutes and then I'll wind up. So the point that I'm trying to make is that maybe Kamala Das has a very complex relationship with our understanding of feminism, because much of feminism today talks the language of consent, right? And consent is something that is built on a certain notion of individuation, agency, your capacity to take a decision, etc. Wherein you don't find in Kamala Das that kind of a very nuanced, liberal notion of a modern individual. Whereas you see the opposite, where the individual is actually kind of ripped apart, what we in theory sometimes would call as a certain kind of schizophrenization, right? And in another story, for example, you have um, a woman writer who is murdered at her own house, and the police arrive, and then the investigation starts, and then they find a clue about a possible culprit, who is somebody who was there in, who had crossed path with this writer at a very early stage in her life. And we come to know, like when the policeman goes and interrogates this person, we come to know that he is somebody who actually had at some point, at one point in her life, raped her when she was a very young child. Now, what is really striking about this incident in the story is that it is just remarked in passing. I mean, there is nothing much that is written about this incident, and this is not presented again as some kind of a, you know, something that kind of creates rage in you. It is just a passing incident in the story, nothing more, nothing less. And Madhavikutti as a narrator doesn't say anything about this incident than what is stated in the story. So how do we understand this kind of a violence that is there? A violence which is not presented as violence. So this is what sort of made me think when I went back to her works. And one of the ways in which you can think about is by saying that, okay, this is part of the everyday, right? And there is this word impunity that we use, because if you are exposed to violence on an everyday basis, even violence becomes less violent. But on the other hand, if you really think about it, maybe there is another way in which you can understand it. I will not get into that, because it's also very complex. There is also a certain relationship that Madhavikutti or Kamala Das establishes between violence and desire. So again, the idea of consent that we have today is something that is based on a clear separation between violence and desire. So you say to sexual intercourse, so you say yes when the possibility of violence is completely ruled out, and the yes is something that is based on a certain notion of desire. There is a complete separation of violence and desire. But in Kamala Das, you don't see this clear separation between violence and desire. And I don't really know how to sort of think through these problems, but then definitely Kamala Das sort of present a problem before us, which we probably need to think more about. And in order to think about these, probably we also need to sort of go beyond our notions of modern individual, or this liberal notions of freedom or individuation, or even feminism for that matter. But how exactly one can do that is something that is that I'm not very sure about now. But then this enterprise has actually given me an opportunity to sort of think through some of these issues. So again, I thank the organizers for this opportunity, and I will stop here for the time.